Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I am the host of the Reformed GGA channel, and today I'm going to be doing an initial impressions video combined with kind of a comparison with an old standby. Those of you guys who know the channel already know what my old standby is when it comes to this genre of gun, but for those of you who are not aware, when it comes to PC3s, pistol caliber guns with a third point of contact, my go-to has been the CZ Scorpion Evo 3 S1. I'm not saying that it's the perfect gun for anyone or anything like that. I'm just saying that it's the gun that I've had the best experiences with in this particular class of gun. Within the realm of PC3s, pistol caliber guns with a third point of contact, it's the one that I've been the happiest with its performance. Now, of course, these come in several different configurations. They have a full rifle size, a 16-inch version that is a carbine form. This is the roughly 8-inch version. It's technically a little less. It's like 7.7 some odd inches. But this is kind of the standard pistol model. They also have a K configuration that has a barrel that's about half as long. A few different configurations out there, and they kind of have grown in reputation, and they've kind of become an industry standard in a sense. Not to say that they're the ultimate of ultimates, but they're kind of at a unique place in the market in terms of the features, reliability, and the cost, and also the availability of third market products that would support this one. That conglomeration as a whole has kind of led to CZ Scorpion being the industry standard. Everything kind of gets compared to it. Not to say that it's the best, but just say that everything is compared to the CZ Scorpion. Is it better or worse? Does it cost more? Does it cost less? Does it have as many features? Does it have fewer features than the CZ Scorpion? It's kind of become the de facto standard of comparison. And I would say for good reason. Other people differ on that. We can talk about that. But for better or for worse, that's the way that it has been. And so I'm going to continue that theme here by comparing the new gun that I got to this old standby. So what is the new gun that I got? Well, it is new kind of more so technically than it is in the broad scheme, but it is a Stribog. A Stribog SP9A3. So this is the roller delayed version. Whether or not it's truly roller delayed in the sense that other roller delayed guns like the MP5 is roller delayed is debatable, but it is a roller of a sense, and we'll talk about that in more detail as we go along. Excuse the background noises. But this is not a new gun to me. Well, in the sense of it being the roller delayed version, it's a new gun to me, but the Stribog itself is not new to me. I actually used to own the SP9A1 version, and that was the Gen 1, the one that had the two recoil rods. And I actually liked that gun to a very great extent. It felt good to shoot. It was actually pretty decently reliable. The only real complaint that I had about that gun was the magazines, and a lot of people wound up having the same complaints. It's kind of been shown that the magazines are not really all that great. There have been problems with them splitting along the back, and there's also been problems with the feed lips breaking and cracking and becoming loose and doing all kinds of weird things. And so my initial reviews of that gun have kind of been borne out. You can find them still on my channel. That's actually one of the more popular videos that I did. When it first came out, people really loved the Stribog and were totally excited about it because it was going to be the CZ Scorpion killer. You know, it's the gun that offers all the same basic features, but for significantly less cost. Awesome, let's go do that. Or get behind the gun, and it's just totally awesome in every way. Well, there was a lot of ways in which it was pretty awesome, but the big downside to it was, of course, the magazines. Now, in this new version, SP9A3, they also had a lot of problems as well, and actually even more than they did on the original. On the original, it was basically just the magazine that was the problem, and if you wanted to run the gun for any prolonged period of time, it just kind of became known that you buy a lot of extra magazines, and you know, as you use up a magazine, then you kind of switch to the new ones, but you keep a lot of them just in the package so that you can cycle to them when the time comes. You don't use all of your magazines all the time with it. It kind of just became the general rule. And other than that, they're actually pretty reliable, especially that very first generation with the two recoil rods in it. That was actually really good. And then Grand Power, which is the company that makes the Stribog, they decided to come out with a different version that didn't have the 2 recoil rods, that only had 1. And that had some issues. And in addition to magazine issues, you started getting reliability problems. And those reliability problems were compounded by the fact that since they took out that extra recoil rod, you could actually get casings back into the action of the gun, back into the trigger pack area, and that caused some real major problems. And so the second generation was actually worse than the first generation, which is not how that normally goes with most guns. Most guns, they make incremental improvements, not incremental reductions. But that's the way that it wound up. And most of those problems they found ways to resolve. As far as the reliability issues, they basically changed the springs that were at play, the main recoil spring that was at play, and that seemed to take care of most of the problems. And then in terms of casings getting stuck in the action, people learned more or less that when you clear a malfunction in a Stribog, that you need to tip the gun down and so that the ejection port is down, and run your and cycle your action that way. Either that or just drop the magazine and remove it that way. But whatever you do, they learned real quick that you do not want to tilt it up with the ejection port facing up. That did not work very well at all. So kind of found ways around the problem, more or less manageable. The magazines were still an issue. And then Grand Power decided to redesign the guts. Now, they had already done a lot of these changes over in Europe. Grand Power is a European company. So a lot of these changes had already happened over there, and America was kind of getting the after effects, if you will. A lot of the stuff that was happening over here was kind of delayed by issues with getting the ATF to approve things and things like that. And so the American stuff kind of got stuck in the middle of what was going on with their European production line. And so they had to make kind of adjustments on the fly and things like that, and that's why so many quote-unquote bad guns went out, is that they were kind of in the middle of what they were doing over there and what they were doing over here, and they wound up trying to combine parts from each system, and it didn't work very well. But one of the things that they had going on over in Europe is they already had these roller delayed guns, these delayed blowback guns over there. And this was their main product line over there. It just hadn't been ATF approved over here. And this is what they really wanted to sell, because that's what they were shifting their entire product line to. And they finally got the ATF approval and all that kind of stuff. And they finally started shipping them out here. And all kinds of nightmarish things started happening. The magazine issue was still there. It was not resolved. You still had unreliable magazines. It still only had a single recoil rod instead of the dual recoil rod that they started out with, so you could still get stuff caught back in the action, which was a problem. And on top of that, the roller delayed system that they had put in effect, they had put in effect for basically NATO spec ammunition. Over in Europe, there's not nearly as big of a commercial market as there is here in the US. Over in Europe, a lot of their sales were going to basically specialized agencies, either law enforcement agencies or security agencies and things like that. And over there in Europe, the standard as it is over here in the US for military type applications of 9mm is that you use NATO spec ammunition. Well, NATO spec ammunition is basically plus P ammunition. And if you're working for a government agency or a security corporation or something like that that can pay your ammo bill for you, that's not a huge deal. But getting NATO spec ammunition as an ordinary civilian, especially here in the US, where that's just not been how we've done things for the ordinary civilian. Yes, we do have NATO spec ammunition that would be in the realm of kind of sort of plinking ammunition that's available at least sometimes, but not all the time. For example, Winchester puts out some plinking ammunition that is NATO spec, but it's not super common over here. And again, we're doing this as private individuals. We're not doing this as, you know, government agencies or corporations or anything like that. And so we don't go for the more expensive ammunition. We go for standard pressure stuff that tends to be cheaper, and over here it's produced in much larger volumes and therefore much less expensive, etc., etc. That's how we do things. And so when they had something that was designed for NATO spec ammunition coming over here, and very much so fine-tuned for that NATO spec ammunition, and they brought them over here and we started using our normal ammunition in it, it did not work at all. It was a disaster. And so they wound up having to make several generational changes, and that's where we are with this one. This is the SP9A3, but it is after the distributor, which is Global Ordnance, basically took it and said, okay, we appreciate what you did, but it's not going to work for the American market as it is, so we're going to tweak it, is basically what they decided to do with it. So they actually changed the operating system a little bit so that it would work with lower power ammunition, make it a little bit better for the American market. You'll also see that Grand Power has decided to put in this flat face trigger, and that's because the SP9A3s, as they originally coming in, actually came in with a worse trigger than the original SP9A1s did, which is also a weird way for the company to go. So yeah, they were not working with our ammunition, their trigger pull was worse, and then of course the perennial old problem of having bad magazines was still there, and Grand Power decided to fix that as well. So not Grand Power, but Global Ordnance decided that they were going to fix that as well. They did work with Grand Power on this issue. This is technically a Grand Power magazine, but it was made kind of at the request of Global Ordnance, listening to the demands of American consumers. So they redesigned the magazine. And so theoretically, we'll see how this pans out because I haven't had the chance to shoot this yet, but theoretically at least, this gun should be significantly improved from all the previous generations. We'll see if that actually pans out. Also, a little bit of controversy out there that people talk about is, how do you pronounce it? Is it pronounced Stribog or Stribog or Stribog, or I've heard it like 1,000 different ways. The main two variants though are Stribog and Stribog, and that basically answers whether or not you're using the American name or the Slovakian name. In America, when we give the letter I its full voice, it comes out as I, so we say Stribog. However, in a lot of other countries, including Slovakia, when they give I its full voice, it comes out as an E sound. So over there, they would say Stribog. So which is it? It basically depends on your perspective. If you're going to pronounce it as an American would pronounce it, it's Stribog. If you're going to pronounce it as a Slovakian would pronounce it, or the people who made these things, it would be Stribog. And there's lots of other manufacturers and things like that are like that get made in one country, but when they take it over to another country, it winds up getting mispronounced or just pronounced alternatively, and that's just kind of the way it is. It also happens with the Canik pistols. The Canik pistols we pronounce in English as Canik, and we read the C as we would normally read a C like in cat, and so we say Canik. Well, my understanding is that over in Turkey where they're produced, they don't actually pronounce the C that way. It's a little bit more of a J sound, so it's more like Janik. At least as I understand it, I haven't actually been able to hear any Turkish person say the word of the say the name of that company, and so I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I understand it to be the case. But everybody over here calls them Caniks because that's how it reads in English. Is that necessarily wrong? Well, it is a little bit confusing, but it is what it is, and that's the reality of it. All right, so getting into the comparison. How does this thing stack up to the old standby of the CZ Scorpion? Let's go ahead and break this down in terms of pros and cons, basically. Let's first go over everything that the CZ Scorpion has going for it in terms of pros. The biggest pro that the CZ Scorpion has is that it definitely has a track record that the Stribog doesn't. The CZ Scorpion has had some issues in terms of problems with bad guns. The biggest issue has been out of battery detonations that wind up just completely blowing out the sides of the upper receiver because it's just polymer, and get an out of battery detonation in that, it just goes kablooey and all the way gone. And so there have been cases like that that have happened. And Most of the time that seems to be with poor ammunition relative to the kind of gun that you're doing. It is a blowback gun. This is not a delayed blowback at all. This is straight blowback. And in straight blowback guns, you want to avoid anything that has a weak case. So no aluminum case ammunition is definitely a good idea. You also want to avoid anything that would have a weird bullet shape on the back end, so nothing that is conical on the inside, because if you happen to be a little bit out on it when the gun detonates, weird shapes of bullets can wind up getting caught in the chamber area and doing strange things and cause malfunction. So a lot of the Winchester ammunition, unfortunately, is contraindicated. So no aluminum case, no Winchester ammunition. And then there have been some cases that haven't been directly attributable to the ammunition. There was one fellow who, at least reportedly, I wasn't there, but he did comment on my channel when I talked about the general issue of the out-of-battery discharges. And he mentioned that he was having problems with federal ammunition that, as far as I know, it doesn't have any strange bullet design as far as the back of the bullet being concave like the Winchester bullets. And as far as I know, he was using federal brass case, so it wasn't aluminum case stuff. And he still had problems. And according to him, he had problems back to back. He had one gun that basically detonated on him and was like, well, okay, that thing's toast, and complained to CZ about it, and they sent him another gun, and the same thing happened. Now, that to me seems really, 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 really weird, because when you read about people having these problems, it's not usually back to back like that. That's just really weird and bizarre. But it has been known to happen with CZ Scorpions. Now, those cases are very, very, very few. I'm only aware of about a dozen or so cases out of literally tens of thousands of these things that are out there on the market. Just looking at this particular one, this one has a serial number that's, you know, up there in the 40,000s, and if they go by sequence at all, that would indicate that there's, you know, at least 40,000 of these things out there, and we only have a dozen or so cases of out-of-battery detonations that have been a problem. That's not huge, and I personally haven't experienced that problem. I have experienced problems with the Winchester ammunition because of the cone shape in the back of the projectile, causing rings of copper to get stuck in the chamber area. I have experienced that, but in terms of it causing an outright out-of-battery detonation, no. So that is a weirdity, but it is very, 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 very rare. On the whole, the CZ Scorpion has a reputation for very high reliability in terms of the kinds of rounds that you can put in it. That is, it works with the vast majority of subsonics that are out there. It works with fairly low pressure stuff, very high pressure stuff, pretty much any grain weight that you can think of. Just about any 9mm ammunition that is out there. Like I said, as long as you stay away from known problems like the aluminum case ammunition and ones that have a weird shape to the rear end of their projectile, it actually seems to do just fine. So in terms of reliability, it has a great reputation. It's been used by a lot of law enforcement agencies, a lot of government agencies. I think a few military contracts here and there, although it's not obviously going to be a frontline gun because it's just 9mm. But it has been used around the world in a lot of different avenues and ways, and overall, great reliability. In terms of average count between malfunctions, and every gun will eventually malfunction if you run it long enough. For CZ Scorpions, it's usually somewhere in the 2,000 to 2,500 range, which is comparable with most service handguns, which is really saying something. Typically, handguns have a better reliability than rifle caliber rifles do. For example, the military's M4 has a malfunction rate somewhere between the 1,600 round mark and about the 1,800 round mark is usually on average where you can expect to see the first malfunction. About that many rounds between malfunctions is usually what happens, which isn't bad, not at all. Anything that's over 1,000 rounds between an average of 1,000 rounds between malfunctions is considered acceptably good for most standard applications. So M4 is still really good, but this one beats it by a few hundred, if not maybe half 1,000 rounds between malfunctions. So this is actually more reliable in terms of round count between malfunctions than the M4 military 5.56 rifle is. So that is a very good track record and a very reliable gun. And like I said, it can feed just about any kind of ammunition that is out there. There's not a whole lot that these things won't cycle. So they've done very well in the American market, in the American commercial market, because we have very differing types of ammunition that are out there. And it does pretty well. And it also can feed a lot of different hollow points. Not all of them. Every gun's going to have its limits on that, and there are some hollow point and defensive ammunition out there that are just really strange, but it can run a number of different kinds of hollow points. You're going to have to experiment with yours if you get one to figure out what that is, but it can run a number of defensive rounds and it does just fine with them. So that's the main thing that the CZ Scorpion has going for it, is an awesome track record. In addition to having an awesome track record, it also has tons of aftermarket support at this point. It has been in the American market for a very long time now, like decades, and there's lots of third-party companies out there that make various items for the gun. You can see a couple of them on mine. HB Industries makes braces, and this one is a particularly, this is SB. This is an SB tactical brace, and this is one of the things that the aftermarket in America came up with to make these guns a little bit more adaptable to the common American's consumer, because a lot of common Americans consumers don't want to go through the hoopla of SBRing their guns and basically buying into the whole registry thing that the government's doing with that. And so this is the alternative that they've come up with. We'll see what goes on politically regarding that, but at least as I understand it for the time being, these are still legal. This grip that I have here is a Magpul grip. For the CZ Scorpion, I do not recommend a lot of the Magpul products, and this one I'm kind of testing out. I've technically had it for a while, but I didn't really like it, and I decided, well, I didn't really give it a completely fair shake. I didn't really ever shoot the gun with it on it. I just didn't like how it felt, so this week I plan on actually shooting it with it on the gun, and we'll see how that does. But the reason why Magpul and other companies came up with an alternate grip in the first place was because of the safety. With the standard grip that comes on it, you would have your hand high enough that your trigger finger would rub on the safety when the safety was off and ready to fire. Well, if the position that the safety is in when you're firing the gun rubs on your trigger finger, that can be a little bit of an issue. But this one, for most people, it kind of reorientates how your hand is. It puts you a little lower on the gun, and so if you're in a comfortable position to reach the trigger, it usually puts you low enough from that safety that it's not going to be an issue. So it's basically a workaround for the issue of the safety digging into people's trigger finger. But that is I didn't really personally find that to be an issue with the original grip. I just decided I would try this one. This is one that came with the gun. I didn't want it, but it came with the gun, and so it's just, okay, I have it. But I'm going to go ahead and try it out in contradistinction to the original grip that they had on there. But that's the thing. There's a huge aftermarket base for the CZ Scorpion that includes grips and alternate safeties and all kinds of things like that. So if there's anything about the gun that you don't like, there's probably somebody out there that makes a part or a widget or whatever that will fix whatever the issue is. So number one, has a great track record and is very reliable in terms of average round count between malfunctions, and also can run a wide array of ammunition. And also, second issue in terms of support for the CZ Scorpion is that it has a lot of aftermarket support. You can find all kinds of little things in the aftermarkets that will go for it. Another advantage that this gun has relative to the Stribog is the open sights that it comes with. The open sights that it comes with are kind of heavy in terms of weight. They do weigh the gun down a little bit, but they are very precise and also fully adjustable. The first one is adjustable for elevation, the back one is adjustable for windage, and it is an aperture sight, and so you can flip through that and find the right aperture for the right setting, all that kind of thing. Very good open sights that it comes with out of the box. Now, pretty much everybody's going to run some kind of a red dot or anything or something like that on there anyways, but just knowing that you have a really nice set of open sights is nice. So that is a plus in my book for this gun. Another issue that's a place where this stands out as being clearly superior is the takedown. The takedown on these things is incredibly easy. Run the charging handle, lock it back. So that's what I've done. I've locked it up. So you lock it back, and then with your finger you press on the takedown pin, and finger pressure is all that's necessary. Pull it out from the other side. The trigger pack and mag well come out, and then I push down on the bolt, and then it comes out, and that's it. I have the bolts, I have more or less the upper receiver, and I have the trigger pack, and that is all that there is to taking this thing apart. And putting it together is basically the same thing in the reverse order. Put the bolts in, then the trigger pack goes in, and with this grip, the trigger pack does not go in as well as it does with the standard grip that it comes with, so bear that in mind. That's one of the problems with aftermarket products, is sometimes certain things don't work together quite as well as the original parts were meant to, so you have to be aware of that. But it's still not very bad. You saw how that went together. Then of course, take the charging handle down and you are good to go. So it has a better track record in terms of the different grain weights that it can shoot and the different ammunition that it can shoot. Has a better track record in terms of average count between malfunctions than most of the other guns that are out there. It is superior in terms of aftermarket support, because there's tons of aftermarket support for the CZ Scorpion. It also has the advantage in having really good open sights that it comes with. It's not as big of an issue these days as it used to be, but it's still very nice sights that it comes with out of the box. So at least you have something that you can work with. You can, if it's a recreational gun, you can just kind of build it pieces and parts as you go along, and you'll at least have something that's operable in the in-between times until you work up to getting your optic on it or whatever. And then last but certainly not least, the takedown on this thing is very, very, very straightforward. Well, I won't say the last thing. There's another thing that needs to be talked about too. But the takedown on this thing is extremely simple. There are literally 3 parts to the gun. There is the main receiver, there is the bolt, there is the trigger pack with mag well. Those are the 3 parts that come across for regular cleaning and maintenance, and that's all that you need to worry about. It's very easy to disassemble, it's very easy to clean it. It's blowback, so it's going to get really dirty, but it's very easy in terms of taking it apart and putting it back together again. Cleaning it, not so much. It's going to be filthy because it's blowback. But in terms of getting to the guts and that kind of thing and putting it back together, it's very straightforward and easy. And then last but not least, and this definitely does need to be talked about because it is a part of what makes the CZ Scorpion, and that is the CZ Scorpion magazine. The CZ Scorpion magazine, this is not actually one of the factory magazines. This is one that Palmetto State Armory puts out that fits in the magwell basically. And these things are awesome. The original CZ Scorpion magazines that CZ puts out are fantastic. These Palmetto State Armory ones are fantastic. The Magpul ones I've personally not had the best luck with. I've had issues with them slowing down the bolt because they ride a little too high, and so they make contact with the bolt as it travels, and that causes issues. And there was also, I think it was the Manticore CZ Scorpion magazines that also had some issues as well. But the factory magazines and the Palmetto State Armory magazines I've not had any issues with. And in fact, Palmetto actually makes an extension you can put on their magazines. There are 35 rounders. The factory magazines are 30. But they make, well, actually the factory makes 10, 20, and 30 rounders. But Palmetto, for their 35 rounders, they make a 15 round extension you can put on them, which is an entire box of ammunition, an entire 50 round box of 9mm ammunition you can fit in one of their magazines. And they're reliable, they work. I've never had one of those 50 round magazines. Well, it's technically a 35 round magazine with a 15 round extension, but effectively a 50 round magazine. I've never had one of them jam on me or do anything like that. The factory magazines and the Palmetto State Armory magazines are awesome. They work, and they work very well. Alright, so those are all the advantages of the CZ Scorpion. The thing can run just about any kind of ammunition that you stick in it. It has a very good reliability in terms of between how far you would go between your average malfunction. It is something that has very good open sights. It is something that is very easy to disassemble and reassemble, of course. It has great aftermarket support, and the magazines are completely awesome. And they just work and work and work and work, and there's no issues with them whatsoever. Let's compare that to the Stribog. The Stribog, as I've said before, has been plagued by its magazines, so that's not an advantage for it. And it has also been plagued by general reliability issues, and so that's not an advantage for it. We'll see how this particular one runs, but in general, Stribog does not have the best reputation for reliability in terms of average number of rounds between malfunctions. Just saying. That's not really where the Stribog shines. But there are some places where it does. One of them is weight. The Stribog that I have here as configured like this, it weighs about 3 ounces less than the CZ Scorpion as it was configured as you saw it. Is that a huge difference, 3 ounce difference? No, it's not, but it does weigh less. Another issue with the Stribog is that it is clearly the thinner of the two guns. It's not as bulky, and that can help with transportation issues because you don't have as much bulk there, and depending on the person's hand size, it can be a little bit more comfortable. Sometimes the CZ Scorpion is a little bit more comfortable because it's a little bit thicker, but it gives you that option. And in terms of transportation, that sleeker design is going to be better. And then there's also the issue of catastrophic failures. I mentioned with the CZ Scorpion that while generally it is very reliable, and they've only had very, very, very few guns that have had catastrophic failures, they have existed. With the Stribog, while general reliability problems do exist, I've never seen anyone report a catastrophic failure with one. So in terms of how many rounds between malfunctions, it doesn't seem to be overly great. We'll see how this one does. But on the whole, it doesn't seem to be overly great. They don't have a very great track record in America. But in terms of catastrophic failures, so far I'm not aware of any. So that is in their ballpark. It is the thinner of the two guns and therefore a little bit more transportable, etc., etc. It is a little bit lighter. Also, another issue is recoil. Now, this one is a delayed blowback system, and that, like I said, it's not the same kind of delayed blowback system as you find in say like the MP5 or something like that, but it is a delayed blowback system, and that will decrease the recoil a little bit, not a great amount, but it will decrease it a little bit. I'm trying to take it apart so I can show you the recoil system here, and it's not wanting to play. It does not take apart nearly as easily as the CZ Scorpion does. Just trying to move out the rear pin, and it does not want to budge. There we go. Finally. Alright, so like the CZ Scorpion, it is a single pin, but as you can see, very tight, and to be fair, this is a new gun. It will probably loosen up with time. Then you pull the brace down and then out. Down and out. Then pull up on the charging handle, and you'll get the recoil spring and buffer. So I have a big old rubber buffer on the end, and then you have the recoil spring. And you look at this recoil spring assembly, it actually has a rod within a rod, kind of thing, somewhat similar to what you see on AKs actually, in terms of the basic principle, two pieces that can slide into each other surrounded by a spring. That's about as close as the comparison gets, but somewhat AK-esque. And then the bolt itself is a little bit different. I'm going to take this out kind of slowly. Now the roller oftentimes gets caught in there, and that is just freaking annoying. Let's see if I can kind of convince it that it wants to play with us. There we go. I found that turning it upside down actually works better for assembly and disassembly purposes. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but this you can leave as one piece and probably should. Some people don't like leaving it as two pieces like this because it takes up more space when they're on their workbench when they're trying to clean and whatnot. I'm used to, cleaning and disassembling AKs, full-size 16-inch AKs. So to me, working with something this size is not a big deal. But if you're someone who thinks that a 9mm gun should fit in the same workspace as, say, your Beretta at 92FS or your Glock or something like that, then yeah, this is going to take up a lot of space. But that is not really here nor there. Put that aside for now. And, whoops, let's talk about the roller delay system. And I made the mistake of turning it over, which means that the pin fell out. But yeah, this is the bolts, and it is a considerably lighter bolt than the CZ Scorpion has, and that results in less felt recoil. And the original Stribog that was a blowback, I actually thought had pretty good recoil feel as well. And a lot of it has to do with just how the bolt itself is designed. The bolt is such that the bolt face is all the way back here, and of course properly oriented. I'm trying to grab the pin so it doesn't fall out. Okay, so properly oriented, the bolt face that holds the bullet in place is all the way back here. And of course you can see that there is a mass that comes forward of that. And in the original blowback version, this mass went considerably further forward. And the advantage of that, it's called a telescoping bolt, when you have part of the bolt that actually projects in front of the bolt face. When you have that, it puts a lot of the weight forward in the gun so that when the gun cycles, that most of the weight will stay forward of your hand and it will keep the muzzle from trying to flip on you. So very, very little muzzle flip by comparison, even though it was a blowback gun. It actually had a pretty good recoil impulse. And the idea with this roller delayed system is that it's going to improve upon that, but most of the people out there have been saying that it's not a great improvement. But here's how the system works. Normally this pin, I'm having to hold it upside down so that it will actually stay in place, otherwise the pin just falls out. But normally this pin sits inside of a little groove inside of the gun, and it keeps the bolt from coming back. But this pin is round, and so it can roll, and so what happens is as after the gun fires, the bolt is going to try to be blown backwards, but this pin, because it sits in a little groove in the gun that hangs down, I'll just go ahead and reorient this. Okay. Alright, so that's how it normally sits. It hangs down a little bit, and as the gun cycles, it has to push against that pin to roll it up into place so that then the bolt can fully cycle. So normally it's down. When the gun fires, it'll pull on that pin, and it'll have to roll up into this little groove, and then the bolt is free to move appropriately. And that is how the system works, and it reduces it creates a little bit more pressure to keep the bolt closed, so you don't need as much weight to do it. That's how the CZ Scorpion does. It has that massive bolt that I showed you, and all that weight is what keeps everything in place so that bad things like out-of-battery detonations and those kinds of things don't happen. Well, in this system, it has that little pin that drops in place that'll try to keep the bolt from opening too soon. It will roll out of the way, but it's not going to happen immediately. So it's a delayed blowback system, and it technically does have a roller, a single roller. However, it is greatly mitigated in terms of its overall effectiveness, in terms of just how much recoil it reduces, by the fact that partially to begin with, just because it's a single roller system, it's going to be somewhat reduced anyways, but in transferring it over to the American market, they had to change the cut. It's that cut that has to fit in that it's pulling against, and they had to make that cut fairly wide, fairly far open in order for it to work with American ammunition, which means that it really doesn't provide much resistance anymore. Basically just enough to make the gun work, and that's it. And so in terms of overall recoil reduction, there's not a whole lot there. So it is technically roller delayed, and it does technically have less felt recoil, and people in shooting it can notice it. It is perceptible, but is it of a similar nature to other roller delayed systems that are out there, more iconic roller delayed systems like the MP5? It isn't really. Not so much. Alright, so when you take this thing apart, you basically wind up with 6 different pieces. You had the main housing that is here, you have the brace, you have the recoil buffer, recoil rod, and recoil spring is one assembly, so we'll just count that as one. So 1, 2, 3, and then you have the bolt assembly, which includes the roller that likes to fall out every time it can, the little cam track that the roller sits in, and then the main bolt assembly. So that's 3 more pieces right there. So at least 6 different pieces when you take this thing apart. So yeah, this assembly is not a particular advantage of it. It does have reduced recoil over the CZ Scorpion though. Is it greatly reduced? You know, compared to other guns that are out there like the MP5? No, I would not say that it is. But is it reduced enough to be appreciable? For a lot of people it would be. You will notice it. Is it enough to matter? That one's harder to argue. I personally don't think it's going to matter all that much, but if you want less recoil for a given price tag, you know, that could be a thing. And that is another advantage of the Stribog. So one of the Stribog's advantages that we talked about is that it is definitely more svelte than the CZ Scorpion is. It is both thinner and weighs less, so it is the more svelte of the two options. Other issue is it is going to have a little bit less recoil, and that recoil impulse is going to be centered further forward, so you get less perceived muzzle flip that way. That is going to be a benefit. And then another issue is that the Stribog does cost less than the CZ Scorpion. Now, the CZ Scorpions a lot of times do not come with the braces on them. This one did come with the brace on it, so you kind of have to take that difference into account. But basically, you can expect there to be at least a $200 difference between the two systems if you kit them out similarly. At least $200 between the two. Is that significant? For some people it will be. $200 is going to be enough. And like I said, that depends on your area. For some people it will be more, some people will be less. But from what I've seen, most of the time it comes out to be at least a $200 difference once you get everything kitted out the same. Another advantage for the Stribog, in addition to being more svelte and having a better, maybe not hugely better, but a better recoil system in terms of overall recoil impulse, and also being cheaper, another advantage is the trigger. The trigger on this one is an upgraded one that Grand Power did. It did not come from Grand Power that way. It was Global Ordnance. I should say it was Global Ordnance that made a lot of the upgrades to the system, including putting in the flat face trigger. And I'm personally not a huge fan of flat face triggers. I actually didn't even realize that it had it on there when I ordered it. But Global Ordnance decided that the original trigger that was on the SP9A3 was not going to cut it, and so they put in this flat face trigger that is still fairly heavy. For me, it pulls at around 5.5 pounds on my trigger pull scale, so it's not a super light trigger, but it is a very short trigger. It has only like 3 millimeters of play. Let's go ahead and make sure we're clear, and go ahead and give you an idea right there. And then resets, yeah, it's about 3 millimeters, and then you're right back into it. Pretty defined wall, pretty much immediate stacking. It lets off just a little bit from that stacking as you pull to the end, but given the size of the platform, I don't think that that's going to be a big issue. So, a very functional trigger, I would say. I haven't actually gone out and shot this thing yet, so I'm not entirely sure, but it seems to be a very functional trigger, and I don't anticipate that being a problem at all. It is definitely better than the CZ Scorpion trigger. The CZ Scorpion trigger started out as about a 9-pound trigger for me. Now, I have shot it a lot because it's like my favorite gun, and so the trigger has gotten worn into the part, and now where it's about 6 3/4 pounds. And so it has worn in quite a bit. It's worn in basically about 2 pounds worth. So it is definitely improving. However, a roughly 6-pound trigger compared to a roughly 4 to 5 pound trigger, that's a pretty marked difference. And so yeah, the Stribog definitely has it, at least in this configuration with the flat face trigger, it definitely has the CZ Scorpion in terms of trigger pull. Another issue that may or may not be an advantage for some people, but I'm going to count it as an advantage, is that the CZ Scorpion has a monolithic upper receiver that is all aluminum. And that solid piece of aluminum tends to be, we'll say, reassuring. It's not necessarily a great performance difference over the CZ Scorpion system, where it has basically two pieces of polymer on top. It has the fore end that is polymer, it has the main receiver that is polymer. Functionally, it doesn't seem to be a whole lot of difference unless you're talking about out of battery detonations. Then yeah, that could matter. But for most other practical applications, it's not a huge deal, but people do like having a metal receiver of some type, even if it is just aluminum. So that is going to be a plus in a lot of people's minds. Like I said, is it effective or not? That's going to be an issue, but yeah. And then also in terms of ergonomics, the Stribog does take some points from the CZ Scorpion, and that while there is some aftermarket support for getting different doodads and whatnot, you don't see a lot of it because the ergonomics are not completely terrible. That is, the safety, even though it is such that if it's down, your trigger finger is going to cover that safety, it doesn't protrude very far out, so it usually doesn't cause a lot of problems. And it is, of course, a fully ambidextrous safety. The magazine release, it works basically just like a regular AR one does, and there is a complement on the other side for lefties. The bolt release is the only thing that really causes any people real major problems. It's this little tab right here. So I lift back and I lift up on the tab, that locks the bolts, and then if I pull down on that tab hard enough, I can get the bolt to go home. Now this piece does not jut out very far, and there is a similar one on the other side. It doesn't jut out very far, and it is just a little bit sharp, and so lots of people don't like that, and the aftermarket has taken to making alternate bolt stop tabs out there, and so that is a thing. Okay, so that in terms of ergonomics, that is the one major improvement that a lot of people make, but by and large the ergonomics of the Stribog are better than the Scorpions. The safety doesn't dig into your hand like on the CZ Scorpions. The magazine release is a little bit easier than the CZ Scorpion. I didn't show you guys that, so let's do that. Here is the magazine release for the CZ Scorpion. The stat form that they have is basically a paddle type release, and lots of people don't like paddle releases. They like push button releases, and the Stribog comes with push button releases, so that is nice for them. And this one is truly completely ambidextrous, even down to the bolt stop bolt catch. It's not the best bolt stop bolt catch, and so a lot of people upgrade it, but the CZ Scorpion is not like that. We have the bolt stop bolt catch on one side, we do not have it on the other, so it is not completely ambidextrous that way. Now the charging handle can work as a substitute bolt stop, as you pull it back and you flip it up, and that will hold the bolt open, so that works. And that charging handle can be moved to the other side. It takes a little bit of doing, but it's not too hard. I wouldn't say that it's field swappable, but you can have a left-handed CZ Scorpion or a right-handed CZ Scorpion. Doesn't take too much doing, but the Stribog right out of the box is just going to be almost as friendly for left-handers as it is for right-handers. The only real major difference in that terms is the left-handed magazine release is a little bit further back than the right-handed one is, and so that could be a little bit different for some people, but you do have all of the controls on both sides, and that the charging handle is swappable to the other side, and it's actually relatively easy to swap out. I would say that it is field swappable. I'm not saying that it's as field swappable as others, but I would say that it is field swappable. So what does the Stribog have going for it? It is more svelte than the CZ Scorpion. It has a lighter trigger than the CZ Scorpion. It has a reduced recoil impulse over the CZ Scorpion. It has lower cost than the CZ Scorpion. It has more ergonomic and more ambidextrous controls than the CZ Scorpion. And that pretty much sums it up. That's the comparison between the two guns as I see it so far. Now, as I shoot this one, we'll see what happens. The big issue with this, the Stribog so far has been reliability issues, and most of them center on the magazines. Now, these steel feed-lip magazines are supposed to be an improvement. We shall see. I'm I'm honestly not sure how to think about this. If it does wind up being sufficiently reliable, then hey, they solved the problem, they fixed it, great. My problem though is that Rand Power knew about this issue for such a long time, and every time they made quote-unquote improvements to the gun, there always seem to be issues with it. I'm just not overly convinced that they've really fixed all the issues now. I would really like to believe they have, because it's been a long time and there's been many generations and little sub-generational changes that have been made along the way. I'm just not convinced that they're there yet. I would really like for them to be there, but we shall see. That one we're not going to know without testing. But I can tell you from having loaded these magazines that these are a pain to load to 30 rounds, especially compared to the CZ Scorpion magazines. These things are a pain to load, especially with steel case ammunition. And frankly, I'm cheap, and so I do tend to use quite a bit of steel case ammunition. Anyway, so I can't really tell a whole lot until we actually get out shooting it, so we'll see what happens when that happens. But for right now, that is the basic comparison between the two guns. CZ Scorpion is the old reliable. It is the stand-in that has, you know, put in the time to get the track record. It can shoot pretty much any weight of ammunition, and on average, as long as you're being smart about the ammunition that you use, you can go a really long time between malfunctions, somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 rounds. It has great aftermarket support. The standard open sights that it comes with are very good open sights. The thing is extremely easy to disassemble and reassemble. Its blowback, so it's going to be really dirty when you do, when you do go to clean it. But disassembling and reassembling it is not going to be the issue. Oh, what was the other thing on there? Aftermarket support. Not a whole lot else to say in terms of support, I don't think. But yeah, there's a lot of things. Oh, and the magazine, that was the other big thing. It has a terrific magazine system, and there's lots of magazines made both by CZ and by Palmetto State Armory that are out there, and magazine extensions and things like that that are absolutely terrific, that work very well. So yeah, in terms of reliability, aftermarket support, those kinds of things, CZ Scorpion is the way to go. If you're looking for something that's a little bit lighter, with a little bit lighter recoil, for something that is also going to have a little bit better ergonomics and be a little bit more lefty friendly, then the Stribog might be something to check out. In terms of reliability, so far it doesn't seem to match up so far, but there's been several generational changes and improvements. We'll see. Oh, and lest I forget, it does, at least in this configuration with this flat face trigger that Global Ordnance put in the gun, it does have a better trigger pull. All right. Thank you all for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.